Good evening, Detroit Lake is the Vikings Territory Breakdown. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of Oofda Sports, which includes a lot of different websites at this point. I have to write them on the back of my hand. Vikings Territory, the namesake of this show. For now, we might actually change the name of the show because our purview's changing. PurplePTSD.com, MiniIce.com, PurpleTerritoryRadio.com, FranchiseTag.com, and brand spanking new, TheDraftTeam.com, which we are joined by the editor of that website, Mr. Kirby O'Connor, today to talk all things draft, team, and draft. How you doing, my friend?
I am good. I'm full of youthful energy and vigor. I'm bringing the youngness on this one.
Thanks for replacing the typical precursor to vigor for the radio. I'm actually only full of that.
That's pretty harsh, Kirby.
A lot of people know. That's Mr. Joe Oberle, who is here every single week against his will. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm all right. I'm good. I'm finally finished boiling sap from my maple trees, and now it's time to eat it.
That is the most Oberle hobby I could possibly think of outside of like whittling or something.
Whoa.
Whittling your knee brace.
In my rocking chair on the front.
It's we're all racing towards the same finale here. Is that something you've done for a while? You've never mentioned that before.
No, I've never done it. This is the first year, and I loved it until the trees wouldn't stop leaking, and it's been like 4 weeks now, and I'm over it. But it turned out really well, so I'm pretty excited.
Doesn't that attract like squirrels or diabetic hobos or like bees?
Some ants showed up when it got really nice out, but other than that, it's there's squirrels crawling around checking things out. But I got milk cartons covered and hoses going in them, and it was fun. Me and my kid did it, and we just had a blast. The biggest part of it is you sit around a fire throwing sticks in it, and BSing and drinking. So
yep.
What's not to love?
But
any more old cracks from you two whippersnappers, and I'm going to file a lawsuit to tweet on you. Okay?
I'm coming after that maple syrup money. I don't know what you're talking about.
There you go.
Have you tasted it yet?
Oh, yeah. I've had, I'm pre-diabetic, and I'm about ready to go into a diabetic coma here. I've been having it every other morning. French toast this morning, dear? How about pancakes?
My teeth hurt. It's been fun on off season thus far. I think like most of my takes, they don't age, ironically enough, very well. At least this off season, when I'm trying to balance my initial thoughts on what the Vikings could do in free agency from a cap perspective versus whether or not I'm just excited that they had money to sign anybody, and then whether or not I'm excited that all of those free agent signings, for the most part, that weren't re-signs or a trade, happened on the defensive side of the ball, which I would hope to believe means that maybe Zimmer will be as overly excited to add another first-round corner, even though Kyle Jowdry of our sites, but also VikingsGazette.com wrote an article this week saying what are the odds of the Vikings take a corner in the first round. Anyway, but I wanted to get a general consensus on that from Kirby first, but I think the best way to kind of introduce you further to our audience, and you've worked on Vikings Territory and Purple PTSD for longer than anyone outside of Mr. Joe Oberle himself, and we just launched your site that you and I have talked about for a really long time, TheDraftTeam.com, and we are, it seems like, rolling out with a new site every 2 weeks at this point. It's kind of a 5-year plan, all coming to a head at the same point. But as I told you the last week, I'm super just happy that we got to this point. You were incredibly incredibly patient and kind in this process. It took us a long time to get here. But if you wanted to kind of let the good folks of northern Minnesota / eastern North Dakota / southern Canada know what the draft team's all about, how would you sum it up for them?
Yeah, so the draft team is, to my understanding as a content creator, as a writer, in its most important sense, it is a tool for our team to better understand the NFL draft process and all the prospects, all the news that comes through, kind of an in-house thing so that we can pull from that as writers on our other sites. It also widens our audience incredibly. Instead of writing about one NFL team, we're writing about 150 or 130, whatever, NCAA football teams.
Yeah.
It just increases our reach as a company, as a brand, much higher. And it really moves me from something that I really have enjoyed doing for the last couple of years, which is writing and editing for our Viking sites into a more into a role that I have wanted to be in for probably a year and a half since we first started talking about this site, which is basically a facilitator of all that information, and along with franchise tagged, kind of moving us into the broader NFL sphere. But most importantly, I think, going back to that, like, the most important part for me is not necessarily that we end up being the biggest site or the number one name in the NFL draft. It's mostly to provide funnily enough, I think of it like it's mostly to provide people writing about specific teams, and the Vikings, specifically in this case, with all of the tools they need to be like the best writers possible and give the best analysis possible.
And
Kirby, you said that you said that it's an in-house thing. Can you tell me why? Why should a reader go see it then? What would they get out of it?
So we are pushing to be the best. We're going to be pushing to be the best team out there for draft coverage. But the in-house thing is like from our side as writers. But I think giving a unique sort of perspective on it from the team and the fan side, one of the biggest things that I think is great about what we do is we have a lot of guys who are very focused on the Minnesota Vikings. Like, it is the biggest thing in their lives. But I think moving that forward with franchise tagged and with getting kind of compartmentalized and getting the people who understand those teams, we really want to push for a personalized experience for each NFL and NCAA team as we grow. So I think that's the biggest thing, is like being as close as possible and finding the right people who are invested in these teams, but still have the objectivity to sit back and say, well, there's problems, and this is how they might be able to fix them.
I think like the best way to sum it up too is like passionate professionalism. We all really care about football, perhaps more than we ought to. But that doesn't remove some of that objectivity, even if for example, a lot of my stuff is very, I'll beat you over the head with my point of view in my story all the time, saying I love the Vikings because I grew up in a household where that Vikings every Sunday was, basically a religion. And what's exciting about the draft team thing for me, and the reason it was it took longer to develop than other sites, was because each week I bet we linked to sites like PFF or Mock Draftable or something 10 times, just on the Viking sites, let alone what we're doing on franchisetag.com, which is the site that came out about 2 weeks ago, which is a general NFL site. But the draft has really developed into a year-round thing. I mean, the NFL is a year-round commodity at this point, but I've had a lot of people ask me questions like, well, what are you going to do with the draft team on May 1st, and it's like, well, that's when all the fun starts all over again. There's going to be
Right.
a lot of, like you alluded to, Kirby, like it opens up uh, uh, maybe me doubling up on my Zoloft amount of a scope that we haven't really gotten into before. I mean, 32 NFL teams is a lot versus just the Vikings, right? We do a lot of hyper Vikings coverage, but then when you get into NCAA football, it's a whole different ball of wax. It's technically an amateur sport. It's in every state. It's really, honestly, super exciting, but I think people are going to find throughout the course of the year that, obviously there's going to be way too early mock drafts and, like during the summer, but I think that right now what the bread and butter is on day one, you guys had over, I'd say, 50 really up-to-date and apt player profiles for the draft, and that's just been increasing day by day. And I think people are really going to like the kind of how you've chosen and picked from different sites that we've cited from to create something that's unique in the landscape. And the internet's allowed us to do all these. It's like a gold rush of ideas, and that's allowed us to get really hyper focused on things we care about. And so I think people will feel that passion there on and all the other sites. So I'm excited about it. I will admit, just as Oberly did off the air, I am not a big college football guy, mainly because I went to the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and I have to be emotionally invested in the team, and the Gophers just haven't been very good or bad my entire life, and there just wasn't a whole lot there. But I keep an eye on it more so than I guess other people do. But if I were to put a gun to your head, which, as the way this week is going, is a very strong possibility, and you had to pick as of right now, after what we see with free agency, Kirby, what position do you think the Vikings will pick at 14?
If they stay at 14.
Ooh, qualifier.
If they stay at 14, I think we will see a pick on the defensive end spot.
Wow.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think it's if they stay at 14, which I feel like I have to caveat because we're gonna get into that. But if they stay at 14, it's kind of the perfect landing spot where this isn't a super strong draft class for defensive ends, but it's a super strong class for a lot of other positions. So that top defensive end has a chance to slide back a little bit. Kwity Paye, Rousseau, whoever your favorite is, it's pretty much between those two as far as I can, that's kind of the consensus too right now. But if they stay where they are, I think they're going to be in a landing spot where the best player available is going to be one of those defensive ends.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, one thing that I'm a little surprised that is, I would say, lost in the shuffle here these last couple of weeks, but hasn't been addressed particularly in a declarative fashion this way, is I honestly thought when free agency started, the Vikings are going to basically try to find as much money as possible via restructures or cutting guys or whatever to restructure Danielle Hunter's deal. And I feel like the more moves they make that are getting them close to the amount of cap space they need to sign their draft class this year, that they're perhaps getting away from that. And that could be for a myriad of reasons. That doesn't mean they're not working with his agent. That doesn't mean that, maybe his cap number, we'll figure that out midway through the year, whatever. But I think that now, regardless of that situation, obviously if Danielle Hunter holds out, it would seal the deal on getting an edge rusher. But I still think that the focus that they primarily put on the interior of the defensive line this offseason shows that they, obviously, and history shows it as well, that they really want depth and a lot of talent from their front four. And you alluded to Kwity Paye and not the Penn State guy, not Jason Owe.
There's two Miami edge rushers who are up there. One of them is Jalen Phillips, and one of them is Rousseau, Gregory Rousseau.
There it is. Who do you like of those two?
Between the two Miami guys, I would take Rousseau. He's got a way higher ceiling as far as I can tell. He's a physical just freak, kind of like Hunter was coming out of college. He's very raw. He's going to need a lot of coaching up. But if anybody can turn him into the player that he could be, I think it's probably the Vikings defensive coaching staff.
Are you surprised by some of the hype that Owe gets as a guy who didn't? Because the way that you described Russo being kind of a freak athlete, Daniil Hunter, I think of the same thing of him. I don't think he had a single sack this season or last season for Penn State, but he's I think there's what's the guy's name? Bruce Feldman does like a annual freak list, like freak athletes, and he's been on that twice because he's just like, I think he's like 260 pounds and he runs like a 4.340. It just makes no sense. But I guess I'm surprised to see him on sites like Walter Football being the number 2 guy ahead of those 2 Miami guys myself. But I guess, his physicality must just be such a rare combination of skill sets that people are willing to roll the dice on a guy like that.
It is, and you can really you can kind of get away with it from the defensive end spot in the NFL, like throwing an athlete out there, especially if you already have a guy who you're confident in on first and second down, and you bring in this freak athlete to play on third down and rush the passer. Because a lot of what run stopping is as a defensive end is technique and keeping your head up and finding the ball and everything. But a lot of passing is just trying to beat the man in front of you. So you can get away with that early on in the guy's career as you teach him how to be a complete player. I think, yeah, Ole is weird, right? He's just a crazy athlete, but I don't see his stock being as high as that. I think he is in the second tier of defensive ends in the draft and is probably going to go day 2.
I did a little prep before the show, and so I have the PFF edge rankings, and the article that came out 2 days ago says he's number 2, and I just thought, I mean, as Joe will attest, I am a gigantic Big Ten fan. I bring it up every week without fail. I love the and I do like.
That's one name for it.
I think that the offensive and defensive lines of that conference are bigger and stronger and the type of guys that tend to pan out more in the NFL. But earlier, Oberly, you when I asked Kirby about the position that he thought the Vikings would end up going with if the draft were held today, you kind of exclaimed a little bit, and I wanted to get your take on that as on your exclamation as things stand right now. I mean, do you think the Vikings stay at 14 if you want to take it that route, or are you looking at left tackle?
There's so many variables in this, and if you look at history a little bit, there's very good chance they won't stay at 14 because of Rick Spielman. But the Vikings need to get a starter. They need Spielman and Zimmer need to get back into the playoffs this year. I'm not going to say their jobs are on the line, but they kind of are. There's certainly been a lot of talk about that, certainly after that disappointing year last year where the defense just went belly up. But so I think they need a starter, and if a starter falls, like the person that Kirby was mentioning, if the best player available falls to that spot, they'll probably take it. I'd hate for that to be a defensive end. I feel like with what they've done already on the defense line, this is contingent upon Danielle Hunter coming back. I think they can plug in Wanham and go there. They've already spent so much of free agency on the defense, which they needed to do. And we talked about it last week, and all to the extent of the offensive line. I'm sorry, signing of Dakota Dozier just doesn't do it for me. But they needed to do it for depth. But my point is, I think if they can find a starter that they can plug into that offensive line on week 1, they have to take that guy. They have to. If they just if they go defensive end because he's a BPA, oh God, fine, whatever, it's great, but the offensive line has gone backwards. They lost their left tackle. They have a right tackle. They still have Ezra Cleveland playing guard, and they have a Bradbury who did not live up to promise from last year. So they got a couple spots there that they need to fill. And we're just going to take the step back on our offense to get the defense filled up. So I think it's a mistake if they take another defender, because I think they've done good in the secondary. I think their linebackers are going to be okay, and I like what they've done on the defensive line. So spend that 14th pick or even trade up and just get the offensive lineman, get a tackle that you want, if there is one. I don't know. You would think there would be, but go get that player so that he's ready to go on week 1, and this team gets to be a little more balanced again.
The way I look at it, when assessing which position the Vikings should take at 14, or in general each year, is to say, from a position-by-position standpoint, assuming the draft pick works out, which is a huge assumption, obviously, what is the benefit, the potential benefit or improvement therein, right? So would finding a left tackle that pans out help the Vikings move towards the playoffs and contention more so than finding someone opposite Danielle Hunter? There's a lot of assumptions in what I'm saying, but the biggest benefit the Vikings can get is shoring up this offensive line. If they have a mediocre pass-blocking offensive line, as we've seen, despite the dwindling number of people out there that still think Kirk Cousins is the problem, this offense is ready to be elite right now. They were pretty close to it, despite the fact that they, by design, wanted these long dink and dunk 10-plus play drives all year to keep the opposing quarterback on the sidelines, which Cousins executed masterfully, in my opinion, probably because of Michigan State. But you know what I'm saying? Like, the benefit of investing in the offensive line now, especially considering what they've done in terms of free agency, which
they did sign that guy from Kansas City, didn't they? Or did I imagine that backup from Kansas City on the offensive line?
They traded for Mason Cole from Arizona. I thought he was.
Yeah, he played for the Cardinals.
Okay,
and he also is a Big Ten guy. So I am. That's all. So mic drop. What do you guys think of Kirby? I've seen some people saying, debating openly whether or not he is a starter or maybe a younger, better, like Brett Jones sort of versatile interior lineman who can play center if and when Bradbury just implodes further. Do you think he's a depth piece, or do you think he's a starter? And if so, where? Because I've heard people asking if Bradbury's going to move to guard, and it's like, then we do that with Elfline.
For now, dust settling on free agency and everything, for now, he is in the position where he has a very good chance of being the starter.
I would agree.
And that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree with you guys and that assessment.
I think I think it was Nick Olson tweeted that Dozier was the worst or one of the worst pass grades PFF had last year, and Cole was like 7th worst. So he's barely an upgrade. It seems like.
And despite a lot of the excitement people had about Cleveland, was kind of like the comparison I've made, and Joe has heard this probably 4 times now, is BC Johnson. Everybody was ready to crown him as this big star because we were used to Laquan Treadwell. And we're like, wait, a guy that's sub-mediocre but that actually catches the ball sometimes? Let's buy some jerseys for him. It's the same thing, I think, with Ezra Cleveland last year. Drew Samia was such an unmitigated disaster that any improvement to us felt like something that wasn't otherwise there. I mean, he was, I think, of right guards, like the 38th ranked against the pass rush in regards to pressures allowed, Cleveland was. And so it's a little disconcerting that, and I keep beating my head against the wall, and I've said this before and I mean it. I'm clearly not someone who is short-winded or that doesn't like the sound of his own voice from time to time, but I really don't want to talk about the offensive line anymore. And people, always tell me they have a plan, and it's like, okay, well, every single free agent they signed was on the defensive side of the ball. They make a trade for a guy that everyone's like, Arizona, that's win-win. They were just going to cut him. They got a 6th-rounder. That's cool. It's this afterthought part of the offensive line, which our in-season co-host Mike Tyson agrees is, obviously the most important position group in the entire league, especially considering we're a passing league. And so, everyone's saying, well, wait for the draft. And so, with I would say the biggest draft expert in the upper Midwest on this show, I wanted your take on the draft class.
It's a lot of pressure.
And I'm going to go on mute for the rest of the show, and we have about 30 minutes left. So,
and I know nothing about the draft, so
I've seen Mel Kiper Jr. saying that the Vikings might be able to trade up to 9 and pick up Sewell from Oregon or whatever. I don't see that happening. I don't see him being available at 9. If he was, I think the Vikings would give up the type of capital needed to move up that many spots. I mean, as we saw, it's astounding, some of these trades that have been made, giving up 3 first-rounders, essentially, or 2 future first-rounders, and a third to move up 10 draft spots to the 3rd spot. I mean, do you feel like this is the draft class where you would need to do that? Or do you think that there's enough depth at the left tackle position? Or do you think there might be more value in getting Mr. Oberle's aforementioned draft obsession Wyatt Davis of Ohio State on the interior, and then maybe moving Ezra Cleveland to left tackle? I mean, a lot of different ways you can answer that question, but make me feel better.
I don't know that I can make you feel better. It's weird. It's such a strange year and a strange process right now because of, I mean, we're still in the midst of the COVID pandemic, so we did not have a combine to compare these guys like end to end, like side by side, in all these drills. So for me, it's kind of tough to make the progression and kind of understand. Like you kind of have to dig way deeper into Twitter and the internet to try to understand what's happening in this process right now. And with yesterday's hype with the quarterback situation, their pro days, and Justin Fields lighting it up, we have now talk of quarterbacks going 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't know. I'm not saying that's a prediction. I'm just saying that it's been thrown out there, and it's not entirely unreasonable that those teams could do that. If that happens, then it's not unreasonable that either Sewell or Rashawn Slater falls to the Vikings at 14. It kind of depends on which positions are going to have a run on them early on in that first round. That will dictate what the Vikings try to do there. And I think there's as you mentioned, Wyatt Davis is in the back end, is probably going to be towards the back end of the first round because of his injury. But he participated in Ohio State's Pro Day yesterday, and everything is supposedly good. Everything's supposedly fine.
Well, then they should draft down and pick him up then.
No, trade
I'm
down.
all for it.
And there's
Steve
Elijah
Hutchinson
Vera.
2.0.
Yes.
And there's Elijah Vera Tucker from USC who played both guard and tackle at USC, who fits kind of the mold a little bit for the guard position. So it's really, I'm not sure how it's going to shake out in that top 10. Nobody really knows right now, other than Trevor Lawrence is going number 1. So I think there will be a quality tackle available early in the 10s. So either Sewell or Slater, who both fit the mold of what they need for a tackle. They're both very athletic. They both would be able to fit into the zone scheme that we have going
level
right
thing
now.
that they seem to prioritize over other things.
Are they week 1 starters?
Sewell is for sure. Slater should be.
Then, dear God, spend some of the capital and go get him!
Yeah, just
Yeah.
lock it down. I would love nothing more for that, even though Joe did pose a very interesting quandary for me last week or as the week before, where if I no longer have the offensive line to blame and my boy Cousins is actually, put in the best position to win, will I be able to sleep at night? I would say the results TBD. But, I would also be remiss if
Sleep at night now?
Well, I mean, technically, I do the Michael Jackson thing where I go under anesthesia, local anesthesia though, so it's all right. I think that the way that I referenced the trade ups and the draft capital given is maybe in a typical year seems like a pretty heavy price to pay, but this draft is different in that there's just a lot of really exciting and, at least on paper, young franchise level quarterback prospects, between Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, who was just dropping dimes left and right on his pro day, who we had an exclusive interview, a video interview with on Vikings Territory like a month ago, which is just like a really surreal thing. Courtesy of Jack Day of the Load the Box podcast, but and obviously these things change kind of day to day, week to week, pro day by pro day, for everybody, Kirby. But I mean, obviously Lawrence is the consensus number 1 guy. He's been for years. Essentially, everyone's been eyeing this draft for him. But where do you put a guy like Justin Fields, who everyone's kind of looking at? Ohio State quarterbacks traditionally don't pan out in the NFL. Don't say anything overly. I'm not necessarily sure why that is.
I'm on a podcast. I'm supposed to talk. What do you sorry, go ahead.
No,
Is that out loud? Excuse me.
Once we get to video, I just want you to Charlie Chaplin it up and all physical comedy. But Kirby, what are your thoughts on the quarterback draft class in regards to maybe people after Trevor Lawrence, or do you think that he is as much of a sure thing as everyone thinks he is?
I would say that he's as much of a sure thing as you're going to get for a quarterback in the NFL draft. Pretty much ever. I think he is that level of talent, that level of consistency. Like, very rarely do we see him make bad plays, and they're not a consistent thing with him. He's always bouncing back, and he's always on to the next one. And he has that sort of, he already has that sort of mentality of moving on and learning from his mistakes that a lot of college quarterbacks do not have. So
emotional maturity.
Yeah, and I think it comes from playing for a contender for his whole career, plus playing against that high level of competition at the collegiate level, even if it's not the Big Ten.
And he needs a haircut, right?
Oh,
Man comment.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. My fiance slowly is trying to get me to grow my hair out like that, which I don't think you do for the first time as you're nearing your 40th birthday. Um,
I just did. I
am
just
I
got
gonna
mine cut
start showing up
after a
on
year.
my skateboard to podcast? It looks sad, sadder. But there's been also, there's been some actual, some Vikings news since we did the show last week. I know that we kind of talked about Patrick Peterson and how that kind of changed the view from Mackenzie Alexander re-signing. I think you said something like that. Hopefully, that was the talker, and then that kind of fell by the wayside. Obviously, he is now back with the Vikings, solidifying the secondary for the most part. They signed Xavier Woods to fill Anthony Harris's spot, which was exciting. I'm seeing kind of a weird split between national media's grade of the Vikings free agency thus far and people on a local level, and I don't know if one of those things is maybe the fact that we're all inside this purple bubble that Kirby alluded to earlier. We hyper focus on the Vikings, and therefore we think all these moves are gigantic splashes, or that people from Bleacher Report, who I'm going to be citing in a second, don't follow the Vikings intimately enough to understand the impact of a mid-round or a mid-level free agent like Mackenzie Alexander will have coming back and playing the slot in a system that he knows, or even having a coach on the field like Patrick Peterson, who is still only 30 years old, maybe 31. But obviously he's not the player he was when he first came into the league. And so I saw an interesting article from Bleacher Report, which basically had all their NFL experts grade out each team, and I think they had the Vikings as a C- to a D in what they've done in free agency. And when I was on Mr. Bob Stansevere show earlier this week, he asked me to grade free agency thus far, and I gave a B- to a B. But as I said earlier, I don't know how much of that is the actual moves they've made in terms of impact, or the impact that it'll have on the draft, hopefully, and opening up, focusing on the line there. I do think it's a little disconcerting that, they've traded for, by all intents and purposes, a guy that would have been cut, and then Dakota Dozier, and then Brett Jones, who actually I think played pretty well when he got time this season, but they just don't seem to really like him for some reason outside of cutting him and re-signing him over and over again. So I wanted to get your guys' take on free agency, maybe not particularly in terms of a letter grade, but do you think that some of the local people who are saying this, puts the Vikings back into the contention conversation, are looking at this through purple tinted glasses, Mr. Oberly, or do you think that the national people are right and some of us are just hyping up a lot of kind of? Because I looked at it in my toxic culture article, and the highest ranked free agent was Patrick Peterson. I think he was like 49th out of 100 according to PFF's free agency rankings, and the rest of them were between 75 and 100 if they made the list at all. And so I kind of want to get a sense on your guys' barometer of the goings on.
Well, if you take it with some context and put it in the context of that they were hamstrung coming into free agency. They made a number of different moves to restructure, to cut loose, to and make a trade, to shore things up. I would start at a C+, and it would go up to a B- B if they keep Danielle Hunter, and there's no problem there. If because you got to kind of lump that into free agency as well, because all that dictates what's going to happen with him, and he kind of wants to be a free agent if he doesn't get a raise. So they needed to bolster the defense. They went after it and attacked it from a number of different positions. I think I'm kind of bullish on Patrick Peterson. I think Zimmer will find a way to use him and to help the team. And Mr. Dancer has really gotten a lot of nice publicity of late because of how he played after he came back from his injury. I think Gladney's good. I think getting Mackenzie Alexander was a nice pickup because here's somebody that's been in the system, knows the system, can come in and kind of pick up where he left off. So and Xavier Rhodes is a nice pickup too. I don't know a lot about him. I haven't seen a lot of his play. I don't know if he's an upgrade.
Xavier Woods, yeah.
Well, who did I say? Rhodes?
Rhodes.
Oh my goodness, sorry. That's a Freudian
You have
slip.
to get off the roads and get into the woods. Huh?
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not proud of
So
that.
I don't know if he's a upgrade or status quo or downgrade from what's his face, Anthony Harris, but and I don't know if it's Anthony Harris from 2020 or Anthony Harris from 2019, how he stacks up there. So I can't really grade that yet, but I think it's good. It seems like it's a nice place filler, at least for 1 year. And if he does well, they can hopefully re-sign him. So, like I said, given where they were at coming in, I'm not as down on it. My grade isn't complete yet. I want to see them sign Daniil Hunter. I want to see them. I would love to see them pick up maybe a defensive end, that is serviceable in free agency and stay away from that for the draft. But I guess I've already said that. So, have at it, Kirby.
I'm pretty much in the same boat as Oberle here. Honestly, I think they've done a decent job trying to get the defense back to a group that we can rely upon to maybe control a game every once in a while, instead of letting the other team's offense just march down the field and score every single time. I think they've done a lot in that way. I think bringing back Mackenzie Alexander was a good move. Bringing back Stephen Weatherly was a decent move. I wasn't huge on him, but I think he'll play as good as the rotation of 4 undrafted free agents that we had last year. If I was going to give it a letter, I think I would call it C+, B- at this point. Hunter's a big issue, like Oberle was talking about. There hasn't been any improvement as far as I can tell, or maybe a very, very minor one on the offensive line. They haven't added anything that's exciting for the offense as far as weapons, and they lost Kyle Rudolph, which, if it's last year's Kyle Rudolph, isn't a big deal, but yeah, I think it's a pretty mediocre offseason at this point. I think it was a good idea to open up that cap space and give themselves room to maneuver in a year where we weren't sure exactly what the number was going to be, and how much money there was going to be to go around, because of obviously COVID last year. I think once again their financial staff did a great job, but talent acquisition is kind of still, the jury's still out a little bit. Patrick Peterson is and has been a good player and a reliable player in the past, and I think he'll instantly make the team better, if nothing else, for the fact that he can get some of these young guys' heads on a little straighter, hopefully, and be a little bit more of that leader that they seem to need in the defensive backfield.
On the field.
Yeah, exactly. The Terrence Newman, if you will.
Yeah, and I think that, you guys nail it. I think that, looking at free agency, also you have to look at the outsized whole, and you guys both alluded to this, so I'm not saying you didn't, but losing Riley Reef, who maybe had his best individual season as the Viking last year, at least in terms of like a PFF grade, that frightens me a lot. Not having, this is clearly not on that level, but not having a real reliable field goal kicker, I think, is, as we've seen, incredibly important and can end up costing not only a game here and there, but as we saw in 2018, a playoff spot, as the Vikings would have made it had Daniel Carlson made those 3 missed kicks against the Packers.
I think we're all, as Vikings fans, aware of the importance of kickers.
Yeah, anyone that was cognizant in 1998 will know what that's about, or every year under Zimmer. But yeah, I think that that having been said, they have on paper filled a lot of starter positions that they were question marks up until a week or two ago, and that
there's
is
bodies there anyway.
it's what that means, I guess, is TBD, which is what we're all saying. I do think that it will be. I will look back at this free agency period and switch it to an F if they don't shore up the offensive line via the draft, because that's kind of the assessment that I've been getting is from the angry emails I get is they're going to draft people, but I've heard that before. I've heard that every year, in fact. And so I'm just waiting to see, because I do feel like something that Kirby touched on a little bit, in regards to prefacing this defense is one that can, sometimes look, near elite, at least statistically, is that as at its full logical conclusion, after years of drafts and free agency and spending every single dime that the Vikings had constructing this defense of his dreams, the peak of Zimmer's defense was arguably 2017 when they had that really flashy third down, like historically good third down conversion or stop rate, and they just never seemed to really be like the type of defense that you would call championship level in and of it themselves. I've always felt that this is a team that needs an elite offense, or at least an offense that's as good or better than the defense to win. They've never been, mean enough or physical enough or stifling enough or any, adjective you want to use. So, what do I think they're close to doing that? A couple offensive linemen away from that offense? I do, but that's as encouraging as it is frustrating and terrifying, because again, this is all repetitive agendas and topics and takes from me. So and Joe, obviously you and I, you've been talking outside of your devil's advocate role last week. You've been on the offensive line topic for a long time as well. Kirby too. So I want to be encouraged. I want to think that they've learned from their mistakes, and I want to be as excited as everybody else is. Do I think these guys will have an outsized impact on the Vikings roster that they wouldn't have on any other team? Yes, but I guess TBD is the best way to put it. But I do want to reiterate to people that they should definitely check out the draftteam.com every day. There's new mocks, new draft news, new player profiles, so on and so forth. My dog just logged on to it. You can find the draft team on Twitter at _draft_team, or you can find my dog on the Humane Society website, I'd say in about 45 minutes.
Poochesforthepurple.com. You're going to start that next week. Pooches for the Purple.
Outside of that, you can also find the draft team on Facebook, facebook.com/the draft team, all one word. You can find Kirby at KJOCON 14, like I actually don't know how to pronounce that, just like I don't know how to pronounce it so well. And you can find Mr. Joe Oberly at Joe Oberly, and you can find me at VTPTSD on Twitter. Thank you so much for stopping by, Kirby. I'm so excited that people are starting to see the vision that you had, almost 2 years ago for the site. And to be completely honest with you, like you guys, you and the team that you put together thus far have exceeded not only my expectations, but the output and care and everything of every site in the network. It's been awesome. It's a beautiful website. It's got a lot of great stuff. We're going to be doing a lot of really fun audio and video content leading up to the draft and after that. And so I wanted to thank you for being patient, and I again want to implore people to check out thedraftteam.com. But this has been the Vikings Territory Breakdown for the 31st of March. Is it March? Oh, yeah, it's March 2021. We will catch you guys next week. Skull.